Today, we yet again have another opportunity to further exchange ideas on how we can become more effective in countering terrorism and in the prevention of radicalization and extremism that breeds terrorism. I wish to take this opportunity to thank you, Secretary General Guterres, for co-chairing this conference with us. Your presence here is a very clear signal of the high priority that you personally, and indeed the entire United Nations family, places on this agenda. I also wish to thank His Excellency Moussa Faki, Chairman of the African Union Commission, for also being here, together with all participants. And I hope that strong and practical proposals emerge in the next 2 days on how the AU peace and security architecture can be strengthened to be more responsive to the terrorism challenges facing our continent. To all distinguished participants present, I urge all of you to utilize the opportunities afforded by this conference to advocate for greater investment and reforms towards combating terrorism. I ask you today to join me in applauding all those who put their lives at risk every day to combat tourism and keep our lives and freedoms secure, and also to all those who are brave and outspoken champions against radicalization and extremism, piercing hearts with truth despite the dangers to themselves and their loved ones. Let us also pause to remember all those taken from us at the hands of terrorists and extremists. For their sake, and to ensure that they are the last victims of such atrocities, we hold conferences such as these to seek urgent solutions. Excellencies, as with the rest of the world, Africa has suffered greatly at the hands of global terrorism. Terrorist groups, and in particular Al-Qaeda's affiliates, splinter groups, and those it has inspired, have an active presence in Africa, taking territory, disrupting the rule of law and the enjoyment of freedoms, and in some cases even posing existential threats to nation states. Groups like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram have started showing that they are a cancer that starts in one region or one country and steadily grows from there, eventually having negative effects across not just that country, but neighboring ones within the region. Given this tendency for terror groups to spread their nefarious tentacles across borders, and given their stated goal of continent-wide oppression and subjugation, no African nation can rest easy, and we are all targets in the sight of terror groups. Terror groups have mutated and evolved. They now feature sophisticated public relations arms, covering their extremism and atrocities under the veneer of operating as quasi-governments and providing public goods akin to those provided by the state. They do this not for the benefit of the people subjugated under their tyrannical rule, but as a means of creating a false equivalency and respectability to their criminality. We cannot cede ground to such groups if we hope to build a prosperous and peaceful Africa where freedom and justice reign supreme. A strong state, bold and adequately resourced to combat terrorism and extremism in a way that at all times upholds the fundamental values of our democracies, is a prerequisite for security, development, and deepening democracy within our nation states. The continued ability of terror groups to radicalize, recruit, and train our young people and thereafter deploy them to commit unspeakable horrors is a wake-up call for all of us, both state and non-state actors, both domestically as well as internationally. International bodies, individual governments, civil society, parliamentarians, the media, the religious sector, and all relevant stakeholders must come together, act in concert, and ensure that we channel the immense talents, energy, and vigor of our youth to the betterment of the world and to advance the quest for the human race. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we need to respond to the profound threat of terrorism with a mix of capabilities and frameworks that are informed by lessons learned and driven with much greater urgency and determination. Our most important and immediate goal is to ensure that Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates and surrogates do not hold any territory in Africa. Holding territory is their single greatest source of financing and results in recruitment, training grounds, and also claims of legitimacy. They exploit investment, trade, and humanitarian spaces to sustain their evil campaigns. The result of this reverse development has increased the phenomenon of internally displaced persons and contributes to general social and political instability in states, nations, and regions. The hard lesson we have learned is that multinational military missions that deny terrorist territory need to have strong mandates, appropriate force enablers and multipliers, and be deployed alongside a comprehensive terrorism sanction regime and implemented together with a political strategy for stabilization and the delivery of services to the population if they are to be successful. These necessary measures require extensive support in terms of funding, logistics, legal frameworks, and multilateral cooperation, but are more than worth it when one considers the countless lives saved, dignities protected, and the protection of economies and fundamental values that result from such investment. Distinguished participants, we cannot just react to terrorist acts. We must do more to prevent incitement as well as recruitment. Here in Kenya, I am happy to report that we have built a robust prevention response underscored by the development of county action plans to counter and to prevent violent extremism, which have devolved terrorism prevention to the local level. The 47 county action plans in our 47 counties bring together the security services, administrators, civil society, and ordinary citizens to prioritize collective actions that are measurable as well as time-bound. Their efforts will be complemented by a student safety and security mechanism that our Ministry of Education has developed and will start rolling out in the next few months. Its goal is to protect our children from multiple threats to their well-being that may make them vulnerable to radicalization. This intervention is in addition to my government's broad-based enhancements with regard to the quality and access to education, as well as to employment and self-enterprise opportunities after education to give dignified work to our young men and women. In tandem, the two go a long way towards denying extremism a fertile ground within which extremism cannot take root. Every nation in Africa needs to do more to develop and deploy strong disengagement, rehabilitation, and reintegration capabilities. Over the last 3 years, Kenya has prioritized this area by implementing legal and policy tools, in addition to working closely with local groups and civil society. Already, we have seen positive results from our endeavors, including hundreds of individuals, many of them returning terrorist fighters, turning away from terrorism, and leading the fight to similarly rescue others who remain trapped in the throes of extremism. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, terrorism is a Pan-African threat that requires Pan-African responses and solutions. I call upon the African Union to generate a powerful political consensus for confronting and defeating terrorism and all other forms of violent extremism that are conducive to terrorism. As a continent, we must speak boldly and with one voice, declaring to the enemies of freedom that we shall not relent, and at the end of the day, we shall and must prevail. I urge this conference, the African Union, and United Nations summits to come to deliberate and develop dynamic solutions that deny groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab a foothold and a space to grow within Africa. Discussions and solutions should propose multifaceted approaches to combating terrorism, extremism, and radicalization that confronts the vice on the battlefield, in places of worship, in marketplaces, in our schools, as well as our homes. Internal capacity of African states must be enhanced and cross-border and multilateral efforts geared up. In that regard, the African Union's peace and security architecture can respond to these needs by receiving input and guidance from member states, and I trust that the commitment shown by the United Nations, and in particular Secretary General Guterres, will translate to measures that enable the AU advance our continental fight against terrorism. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we have the means and resolve to win this fight, and our people demand we take the urgent steps that are required for that victory. The victory that will exemplify the goodness of humanity. Kenya will stand alongside all of you in this mission. I thank you for the work that you do every day to make the world safer and better, and I wish all of you a very productive conference and an enjoyable stay in Nairobi and in Kenya as a whole. I thank you for your attention.